The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 80. An Unforeseen Disaster. Part 1. The Hector Kingdom was once a power comparable to the Kronos Empire. They were growing rapidly based on their defenses, but they fell to hell after losing the war against the Valhalla Empire. Their current situation wasn't much different from the Cairo Kingdom. They had no choice but to look at what the empires were doing while making any decision. And as a result, a meeting was being held covertly in the royal palace, away from the prying eyes of other people. A man with a scarred face, Jackson, who was also the commander of the ranger unit, knelt before the king of Hector and reported the information he had learned. Last year, the ranger unit scouted the southern front of the Cairo Kingdom 48 times. We came to learn that the southern front consists of 5 defenses in total, and the Cairo Kingdom is not interested in the southern front, and they mainly use their forces to defend the western front, which is constantly at odds with the Kronos Empire. The guards of each defense line usually work for 4 hours before they change their shift, and the guards and soldiers both have noticeable lazy attitudes. It must be because they think that they have a peaceful relationship with us. From all of that, I don't think it will be too difficult to capture the southern front. Indeed, it was something they could do without even losing the lives of their soldiers. They were giggling as they observed the drunken guards when they snuck into the bushes to inspect the fortress walls. A long time ago, when the Hector Kingdom was called a great power, the Cairo Kingdom had never shown such complacency. At that time, they used to guard the southern front as well as they did the western front. However, as time passed, the Hector Kingdom lost its power, and the Cairo Kingdom began to believe that the Hector Kingdom was the same as them. And why would they be afraid of someone of the same level? From that point onward, they didn't even think that the Hector Kingdom would invade them. Father, can I say something? In addition to the king of Hector and Jackson, there was one more person there. He was a man with red hair. He was Edwin Hector, the only son of King Hector. Say it. The Hector Kingdom has been going through an incredibly bad harvest for the past 5 years. The drought has caused the soil to dry up and die, and the crop and showers are also being swept away by the powerful winds. Also, the strain on us is only increasing as a result of the money we borrowed from the Golden Bank to fix the issue. The might of the Hector Kingdom is no longer sufficient to endure this. The national treasury has been drained for a long time, and if this trend continues, it won't be long before Hector loses the name of a kingdom on the continent. It isn't like I don't know that. King Hector looked distraught hearing all that. The former king had started a war to achieve his grand dreams, but the consequence of that was still being borne by his descendants. King Hector was also a victim of that. The situation of the Hector Kingdom wasn't good even before he took the throne, and he took on the throne when the nation was going down fast. Thus, people said that the heavens were angry. Seeing people sitting on dry and twisted land while weeping, Edwin decided the time to make a decision had already come. Edwin said, "From a long time ago, the Hector Kingdom has shunned war with the belief that we can't make the same mistake twice after we lost the war with Valhalla. But we can't do that anymore. Since we are the ones alive now, we must take action to help our people who are in despair. The defeat Hector suffered in the past wasn't actually suffered by us. We have spent the entire last year putting a lot of effort into our preparation, and this time, we have to go against Cairo, not Valhalla. We need to choose now, for the sake of the kingdom." War was a word no one dared to say in Hector. Although King Hector was considered to be weak, he was actually cautious. That's why he planned it for a whole year. And finally, after they were ready for war, he discussed it earnestly. "Is that man really my son?" Edwin Hector didn't resemble his father. He was strong and had inherited the mighty bloodline of the once mighty Hector family. Looking into his son's eyes that were burning with greed, the king asked cautiously, "Are you sure?" "Yes. If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't have spoken of this in the first place." "I get it." Tack. He got up from the throne. As the saying went that heroes were born in times of turmoil, he considered Edwin's growth to be inevitable. All the matters related to this war will be entrusted to you, Edwin Hector. Thank you, Father. Finally, the Hector kingdom had come to a decision. Around that time, the 3 weeks of training at the Southern Training Center were also finished. In front of hundreds of trainees, Viscount Bale delivered a boring speech. Everyone has been through a lot. Unlike the Western Front, many battles don't take place on the Southern Front usually. You will spend more days bored than you think once you have been assigned to a unit, but you must not forget that you all are soldiers who protect the Cairo Kingdom and cannot carelessly invite disasters into the Cairo Kingdom. I hope your time on the Southern Front will be peaceful. Those were words Viscount Bale had constantly repeated each time the training of any unit finished. And just like that, he ended his speech with words even he knew would not make sense. Right after finishing the ceremony, he called for Roman to meet him separately. Just like when they first met, he gave him some sweet coffee while having a kind smile on his face. From today onward, your unit will be formed as a reserve unit that will serve on the 5th Defense Line. You have probably heard of what the other nobles have to say. It is a paradise where all nobles wish to be assigned to, and it is the place where one can live most comfortably while their freedom is limited the least. And, I also used my contacts a bit to assign you to the 5th Defense Line. He had already heard the rumors from when the nobles were talking in the shade. Many nobles spoke of the 5th Defense Line. As it was famous for being the most comfortable one, it was difficult to get assigned to it without any connections. And Viscount Bale usually exercised his power for a special price. However, this time, he was in a position where he had to show himself as someone nice, and he had to reveal his own power so that Roman would do him a favor. Thank you. Why thank me? I am just doing the right thing. And I already told you earlier, there isn't much I want. I only want you to tell Marquis Benedict that you had a comfortable life on the Southern Front because of Viscount Bale Frank. That is all. So, if you ever need anything while staying on the Southern Front, feel free to come to me. The job of the commander is to help the ones who come here. As Viscount Bale smiled and Roman nodded his head, the meeting ended. Roman left the commander's room. There was one more person looking for Roman. It was McBurney. He was the instructor of the Southern Training Center, and he spoke to Roman with a different expression than usual. Thank you for all you did. Actually, there was no noble yet in the Southern Training Center who showed the passion for training as much as you, Mr. Roman. Dmitri. Thanks to you, I realized what I was working for, and I think I will be able to teach the future ones even more passionately. Also, I prepared this because I thought it might be a bit helpful. It was because McBurney wanted to give Roman some gifts. They were a shabby book and a map. When Roman looked confused, he added, "This is a compilation of information about the Southern Front. If a war breaks out on the Southern Front, this is the information you will need. Of course, spending 2 years in peace would be the best situation. I also hope for that. I hope that Mr. Roman Dmitri will get out of here in good health. Thank you." As it was a favor without any malicious intent, Roman accepted it while smiling. Seeing that, McBurney's heart instantly began to pound intensively. His heart told him to follow Roman until the end. As a man who was once a warrior, he already knew that Roman Dmitri was a man worth giving his life up for. However, he couldn't. Someone like me will only get in his way. He had already lost one of his arms. And it was impossible for him to even wield his sword properly with his left hand. Roman Dmitri was going to be a big person in the future, and he already had a bunch of talented people like Chris and Kevin. He doesn't need a broken man. If he could not do anything, then he would only get in the way, so he decided that staying here was the right thing to do. And like that, their conversation ended. Roman moved on. Now was the time for him to head to the 5th Defense Line. Roman pulled something out after he moved away from McBurney. I was told Lucas worked quite hard to get this. It was a map that had the Southern Front written on top. It was actually very similar to the gift McBurney had given him. Truthfully, Roman already had the gift McBurney gave him. Before he came to the Southern Front, he had already gathered the required information, so this gift wasn't extremely necessary. Still, Roman smiled as he wanted to thank McBurney. Even now, he kept it in his pocket as he felt grateful to McBurney. There was no particular reason for that. Roman only wanted to accept the sincerity the man had shown him. Roman thought that pure kindness itself was something that had to be respected. The deployment of the troops was now finished. And on the way to his unit, Henry walked helplessly. Why do I have to move on my own? Shouldn't the nobles be given their own wagon to carry their things? His soft feet, which had never suffered till now, were hurting. As he had to travel a long way on his feet, which had no calluses yet, he felt thirsty and sweaty. However, he could not demand a wagon. It wasn't impossible if he used his connections with Viscount Vale, but the problem was that he was too concentrated on Roman Dmitri. It didn't seem as if he was dissatisfied with the situation of walking with his own soldiers. How did such a situation come about? Viscount Vale called Henry aside and emphasized a few words countless times yesterday evening. Henry, I have organized it so that your unit serves on the 5th defense line, along with Roman Dmitri. Within 2 years, you need to somehow get close to Roman Dmitri. Keep it in mind. This is a very serious matter on which your uncle's future depends. So, no matter how precious you are to me as my nephew, if you don't do this job correctly, I will be angry. He felt lost. Being assigned to the 5th defense line was good news. If it had been just that, he would have been smiling and jumping around, but now, the thought of spending time with Roman Dmitri made him annoyed. Still, what could he do? The reality was already in front of him. So, all he can do is try and show Roman a little of his better side. Thus, rather than ranting, Henry chose to walk with his soldiers too. How far did he walk? After moving for a long time, the group was finally able to arrive at their destination. But the scenery there was different than they had expected. Tang! Tang! Emergency! Emergency! Everyone, prepare for combat. It was a total mess. The sound of bells ringing loudly could be heard, and everyone was running around constantly. Back then, they didn't know what had happened. And as Henry was wondering what could have happened, an officer approached and said, "Just now, the 5th defense line of the southern front has been attacked. The Hector kingdom has declared war." The moment Henry heard the word war, his heart sank to the bottom. Chapter 81. An Unforeseen Disaster. Part 2. 1 hour ago, when the sun rose to the middle of the sky, Cairo's soldiers, who were on guard duty at the 1st defense line, looked at the border with relaxed expressions. Work had always been boring for them. There was no one in sight, and they had nothing to say about working on the border while having nothing much to do. Finally, after being unable to stand his boredom, a senior soldier sat on the floor, leaned his head against a wall, and said bluntly, "I am going to sleep, so inform me once the shift is finished." I understand. It was a normal situation. On the southern front, where there was no need for them to endure their drowsiness and watch the border, they rested when they wanted to. Just how much time had passed? The next shift soldier came to him. "Gee, get up. I think you should see this." "Man. What happened?" "Ugh." He was a senior soldier, yet he was forced to wake up from his sleep. He was about to shout in anger, but when he looked at the scene outside the fortress, he was utterly speechless. Far away, he could see thousands of people attacking the 1st defense line. At first glance, he easily recognized they were armed forces with the flag of the Hector kingdom. He was dumbfounded after seeing that. Finally, after 10 seconds passed, he came back to his senses and shouted, "Call the commander right now. Hurry up." "Why, yes." The soldier went out right away. Even though they were at the forefront, it took a considerable amount of time for the enemy's presence to be known to them. And it was only troops coming for now. Then, a commander, who didn't look all that good, came hurriedly. "What the hell?" The commander of the 1st defense line, Count Donald, confirmed what had happened with a pale face. As it was reported, the troops of the Hector kingdom were advancing, and if things went on like this, it wouldn't be long before they would attack the wall itself. Honestly, according to the manual, they had to attack back immediately. The first step was to block the enemy's approach by using weapons prepared on the wall. Still, even though the soldiers hurried and readied their arrows to fire, he still didn't give the orders. Does the Hector kingdom truly intend to declare war on the Cairo kingdom? The relationship between Hector and Cairo wasn't bad. Especially, as the Hector kingdom was having a tough time recently, there was no reason for them to wage war in their current state. Maybe it was just military training? But if they intended that, there was no reason for them to march with flags fluttering widely. He thought so because the Hector kingdom had no cause for it. Just as a cause was important for war between nobles, a cause was absolutely necessary for one nation to wage war on another. Due to all that, his thoughts were intertwined. Even though the soldiers were waiting for his command with arrows aimed, he didn't give it. If I give the order, a war might actually start. That is a problem that no single noble can shoulder. And as the Hector kingdom is approaching so fast, it can be interpreted that they just want to talk to us soon. Let's try to talk with the commander of the Hector kingdom. It isn't like it will be too late to make a judgment then. Count Donald was a typical scaredy cat commander with no war experience. Eventually, lower all the bows for now. If we show them that we aren't willing to fight, they might resort to talks. He made a stupid mistake. The Hector kingdom had no intention of talking. As their distance to the fortress got closer, they rang the drums on the battlefield loudly, and the commander also ordered them to charge in unison. Thud. 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 Full-scale attack. Attack. Ta-da-da. It all happened in an instant. Hector's soldiers rushed through with siege weapons, and Cairo's soldiers were shocked at the sudden situation, not knowing what to do. The war had only just begun. Still, as it was a scene they never thought would happen on the southern front, they couldn't easily accept what was going on. Eventually, Count Donald also came to his senses. The war he wished wasn't true had turned into a reality, and he realized that in order to survive, he had to prevent the enemies from crossing the wall. Everyone, fire the arrows. Release them. Papak. Hundreds of arrows rose high into the sky and fell toward their enemies. Contrary to the menacing sight in front of them, the enemy didn't lose their spirits for a long time. Only in a few seconds, the troops of the Hector kingdom had raised the shields they had prepared in advance high, and the number of people they lost wasn't too much. Truthfully, most of the arrows didn't even go far and were stuck in the ground. That wasn't only because of lack of training. Aside from neglecting training, some of the soldiers were drunk even though it was morning. If they had known there would be a war, they would have never taken even a sip. But as the war started so suddenly, they couldn't adjust to it. It was a literal mess. When they saw those approaching the wall, they realized not many enemies were killed by the arrows. We don't have enough arrows. Hurry up and bring more. Is the magic weapon not working? Damn it. It was a total mess. Because the arrows weren't prepared in advance, some soldiers had to run to get them, and the magic weapon which was purchased a month back didn't work. It was a scene that showed the reality of the southern front of Cairo. And unlike the western front, where one didn't die from being careless, the southern front was so comfortable that even such basic needs of war were messed up. Finally, tack. A ladder was placed on the wall. Count Donald realized what mistake he had made when he saw the enemy troops coming up quickly. If this is the case, we won't last long. His face turned pale as he understood the clearly unfavorable situation. As soon as he judged that they couldn't stand against Hector with the current strength of the first defense line, he screamed at the soldiers, "Call the reserve unit right now. Bring all the personnel stationed in the units to the first defense line, and report to the royal family that the Hector kingdom has declared war on us. It is an urgent situation here. Move fast." The soldiers went out. The war was a reality now. And from now on, it was their turn to pay the price for their carelessness. At the same time, once they heard that the 5th defense line was attacked, Henry and the others hurried. Huff. Huff. Henry was out of breath. Even though he didn't want to, he had to walk for a long time, but now, as he had been running as fast as he could, he was out of breath. The distance between the 5th defense line and the reserve unit was more than he had expected. And as the officer had said that it would take about 2 hours to go there by walking, it meant he needed to run for at least another hour from now. Is the Southern Front made of mindless bastards? If the purpose of the reserve forces is to support quickly in case of an emergency, shouldn't they be less than an hour away? Ugh, these fucking idiots. He swore a lot inwardly. Henry thought it was good to join the reserve unit and be in a secluded place, but he forgot about the fact that reality was hard and rough. Also, Henry's vision was actually looking for something else. If it is Roman Dmitri, will he be able to reach there soon? As soon as he heard the news of war, Roman led his troops and ran straight toward the 1st defense line. In fact, they were so fast that it took less than 3 minutes for them to vanish from Henry's eyes. He tried to catch up to them, but he soon understood that he could not catch up with them. He felt a bit flustered. Roman Dmitri had trained hard while the other nobles were resting in the shade and making fun of him, but when the war broke out, he was the one who showed a significant difference in physical strength right from the start. On the contrary, Henry was gasping for breath along with his men. They all looked like they were on the verge of dying. As they were running non-stop, some of them even looked dehydrated. Eventually, Henry sat on the ground. He kept exhaling roughly. Huff. 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 Let's take a break. If they didn't move quickly, the 1st defense line would be in danger. But, so what? What good would it be if he died from exhaustion before even reaching there? With those thoughts, Henry laid down. The first place to be attacked was the 1st defense line. But the place that faced the crisis of falling before that was the 5th defense line. Bang! Rumble. The gates have opened. Stop them. The gates were smashed open. The gates, which were made of steel, had low durability due to negligent maintenance, and Hector's soldiers knocked them down with a few hits from the siege weapon. And that was the start of hell. In addition to the enemy troops climbing up the ladder, screams of the enemy forces rushing through the gates like a tide could be heard from all sides. The commander of the 5th defense line, Baron Bruce, staggered back with a pale face. It's all over. There was a reason it was called the Paradise on the Southern Front. Baron Bruce was a rotten person, and besides being in charge and living in luxury here, he never imposed military duties on anyone. The risk? What would be the risk if there wasn't going to be a war? This time, at the request of Viscount Bale, he dispatched nobles who were of little use to the 5th defense line, and even this morning, he felt good at the thought of getting rewards from him for that. But based on what he now knew, not even the reserve forces that would show up would be able to change this situation. To hold on to the 5th defense line anymore is suicide. In order to live, I need to leave this place and run away. He made a quick judgment. And rather than it being about doing the correct thing, it was focused on his own survival. Baron Bruce shouted, "Hold on to your position till the very end. Innocent peoples. Lives will be in danger if this line is crossed. Risk your lives, and never, ever give up." However, contrary to the words he had shouted out loud, he had no intention of risking his life. Still, didn't he need people to buy him time to escape? And as Baron Bruce knew that, he ordered his man and started to run away quickly. "Commander! Where are you going?" "I plan to contact the royal family." "Hold the front." Obviously, there were people in the way who asked him that, and he lied to get away. No matter how things turned out later, he decided saving his life was more important. As Baron Bruce was fat, normally, running for only 1 minute would make it hard for him to breathe. But today, he was really fast somehow. At this point, Baron Bruce, who had fled from the 5th defense line, was sweating heavily. "I need to run. If I arrive at the rear camp, I will be safe from the Hector kingdom barging in. How far did he run? At some point, he saw a group of people who were running quite fast in his eyes. And, at the forefront of them, there was Roman Dmitri. Chapter 82. An Unforeseen Disaster. Part 3. As soon as Roman got the news that the 5th defense line was attacked by the enemies, he concluded it wouldn't last long. The southern front is a place where the sense of defense is lacking in almost everyone, but even among them, the 5th defense line is the worst because it is managed by Baron Bruce, who is entirely rotten. And even if they struggle, they won't last any more than 2 hours. We must get there in an hour, at most. Lucas had given him information, and it mentioned the same thing the book McBurney had given him said. There was no time. After notifying the officers in the reserve unit that he would go, Roman moved with his soldiers. They were informed it would take about 2 hours to reach there as a reserve unit. It was obviously difficult to cut it down by an entire hour, yet, Roman soldiers followed him. It was the moment when the training they had done in the past began to show its results. For soldiers who had climbed a mountain with heavy armor on them on a daily basis, running on flat ground wasn't enough to even make them gasp. And before long, they reached the vicinity of the 5th defense line. And just then, when he saw a man running away hurriedly from afar, Roman signaled his men to stop. Who? The reserve unit. The man looked quite happy. That man was Baron Bruce. To him, the reserve unit was like an oasis in the desert. He wiped the sweat off with his sleeve and said to Roman, "Are you the leader of the soldiers? Give me your official name and guide me to the rear camp." Right now, rather than assisting the defense lines, the royal family needs to be made aware of the dangers on the southern front. He continued to gasp for air. Roman only stared at the Baron, seeing him acting like his decision was obviously correct. The commander of the 5th defense line. It was a face he had seen in the book McBurney gave him. Nevertheless, the problem was that now that a war was going on, he wasn't supposed to be here. There were only 2 possibilities now, either the 5th defense line was breached, or this man had fled away. Baron Bruce. Why are you here by yourself with no troops? Baron Bruce? What a cheeky bastard. As you belong to the reserve unit, you must be the son of a noble at most, so how dare you speak to me without putting a title first? I think you misunderstand something. Grip. Quack. Roman grabbed the collar of Baron Bruce. This movement was nothing much for him. Nevertheless, that wasn't the case for Baron Bruce. He tried to shake off his hand, but his grip was so strong that it didn't move even a single inch. Roman Dmitri looked down at him. As soon as Baron Bruce saw his gaze, he felt as if his heart was simmered into an ice bath. He couldn't handle himself as he witnessed such vicious human eyes for the first time in his entire existence. Then, Roman said, "Your presence here means one thing, the fact that you, who is called a commander, has abandoned his soldiers and ran away. According to military law, a deserter can be summarily executed regardless of their status. Do you know what that means?" No. It isn't no dot. Slash. The wind blew. Baron Bruce didn't even see Roman pulling out his sword, but before he knew it, the blade of the sword reflected his neck being cut. Baron Bruce's head fell to the ground. He was unable to accept his death, so even as his head was falling, he had a pale face. Shhk. Roman just wiped the blood off of his sword. It would have been a truly shocking event for others. Nevertheless, even though it was a huge thing to kill a noble, Roman's eyes were only dull as he gazed at the corpse that now lay on the ground. If he had ordered for retreat, he wouldn't have died by my hands. This wasn't a huge issue, anyway. A war was going on. The only witnesses who saw Roman behead Baron Bruce were Roman and his men, and they would never say anything against Roman, nor were they too surprised by this. In the process of destroying Barco, Roman had shown them his cold side far too many times. And when they saw Baron Bruce acting like that, they, as well, wanted to end his life in the same way. Let's go. Roman took the first step. The soldiers hastily turned away from the corpse in order to avoid falling behind their leader. About 1 hour had passed since the enemy had attacked. It was still time when the defending side could take advantage of their defenses, but as soon as the gates of the 5th defense line were breached, the fight between the two sides had turned into more of a one-sided massacre. Quack! Quack! Ah! There was a cacophony of screams coming from every direction. The soldiers of the Hector kingdom were mercilessly slaughtering Cairo's soldiers, and the enemies were constantly rushing through the gates. There was no way they could stop this. The magic weapons didn't work because of being filled with dust, and arrows wouldn't work because the enemies had breached the wall too. Still, the soldiers were fighting desperately till the end as Baron Bruce had ordered them to fight, and Stephen, the only knight at the 5th defense line, was constantly swinging his sword. Die! Quack! His face was now drenched with the blood of the enemies. At least Stephen, who was called the real soldier of the 5th defense line, was cutting down enemies one after another. There were already 12 soldiers who had died at his hands. Nevertheless, he couldn't see the end of them. And seeing the constant influx of enemy soldiers, even his mouth went dry. Damn it! Damn it! He realized that it was already over. This was a battle they had already lost. If the gates were in good condition, they could at least have endured somehow, but there was no way to stop the enemies from rushing forward as the gates were breached. I knew this day would come. Carelessness was contagious. Everyone knew that poorly maintained equipment was wrong. But didn't everyone act complacently from time to time? Soon, all soldiers accepted it as something normal. The commander of the Southern Front was someone who didn't like change that bothered him. And as a single knight, he couldn't change many things by himself. Thus, he accepted the reality that was in front of him, and now, that had led to the current situation. Rumble! When he saw the wall collapse and the enemies rushing through the now collapsed wall, his eyes began to lose hope. Even with the advantage they had of having defense equipment, the 5th defense line was only able to hold out for just an hour, and it was now collapsing. We cannot go down like this. Even if we have to retreat, we need to take back all the soldiers we can and make a plan for the future. He hurriedly tried to look for the commander in his office. He was going to persuade him to call for a retreat, but no matter how much he searched, Baron Bruce was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't have. Just then, he remembered seeing Baron Bruce running somewhere by himself. At that time, he didn't think he was just running away. Who would even think that? Someone who was the commander of a defense line would escape by himself without even seeing how the fight turned out. Stephen's blood went cold. He had an intuition that this would be where he would die. That fucking pig. He could run away just like him, but he didn't want to. He thought it would be an honor to die fighting while doing his best than abandoning everyone and surviving all alone. Qua! He then gripped his sword even more tightly and ran forward again to cut down the enemies in his vision. He was going to lose his life anyway. Baron Bruce wouldn't leave the survivors alone because he would not want the truth of him deserting the battlefield being told to anyone else, and there was no reason for Stephen to run away from here only to go and suffer there. He felt at ease once he accepted his death. Even though the wounds on his body began to increase, he was only drenched in madness, and he continued to kill his enemies. Slash. He cut down even more enemies. It felt like he had taken countless lives by now with his sword, but in return, he was stabbed with a spear as well. Quack! Quack! An intense pain ran through his head. Finally, he realized he was near death now. As soon as he cut off the head of the soldier who had stabbed him, he gazed at the sword that was coming down toward his head. So this is as far as I go. He accepted his end. But the moment he accepted his death, quack! A man with dark hair appeared, and he splattered crimson red blood all around him. When Roman arrived at the 5th defense line, the gates had already been pierced. He had no time to think. Running ahead first, he gave orders to his soldiers. I will take the lead. Take down the enemies one by one and follow me. In his previous life as Baek Jin Hyuk, He was always at the forefront and fought the enemies before anyone else. That was how he was able to achieve the nigh impossible achievement of taking over the entire Murim. And he decided it would be no different in this world. If he killed even one more person, the damage to his side would be that much less. He tried to minimize it as much as he could. Roman jumped and ran ahead. Then, he swung his sword at the enemies who found him. Whack! It was the beginning of a literal massacre on the battlefield. The two soldiers who tried to attack him instantly had their throats slashed. He was literally too powerful. Like a wolf that had found a flock of sheep, he was moving ahead while slashing everyone in his vision. Still, he wasn't in too much of a hurry. He was taking reasonable intervals when he needed to. It was to maintain the distance from his soldiers. Thus, most of the blades that should have been aimed at the normal soldiers were now aimed at Roman. That monstrous bastard. Kill him first. The soldiers of the Hector kingdom also realized that Roman wasn't an ordinary person. Even though they all attacked Roman at the same time, all the corpses in their vicinity belonged to the soldiers of the Hector kingdom, no matter how many times they attacked him. In just 5 minutes, Roman had killed dozens of the enemy soldiers. The blood of all of them was dripping down his sword, and even Roman himself was now drenched in blood. Just then, Roman saw someone in his vision who was fighting the enemies ferociously. Stephen? He was a person who was mentioned in the book. According to the information Lucas had given him, on the 5th defense line, Stephen was someone who was worth using. Then, Roman made a quick decision when he saw Stephen had accepted his death after slaughtering the enemies he could. He took down the soldier who was swinging his sword at Stephen. Whack! Tuck! Roll. The soldier's head rolled on the ground. There was no time for Stephen to even say a word. It was because another large number of enemies had entered through the wall, and Roman had gone forward to cut them all down. What is this? Stephen was stunned seeing the current situation. Even more shocking than his own survival was the slaughter Roman was carrying out. Was there such a person on the southern front? When he thought hard, he remembered there was one person. Roman Dmitri. He was recently assigned to the 5th defense line. That was what he had heard from Baron Bruce this morning. And when he heard that a ranker was assigned on the southern front, Stephen was actually unable to accept that fact. It was because rankers were incredibly strong. In the end, he thought that it would have been better if he was placed on the western front rather than the southern one, which was known to be peaceful, and that if Roman truly cared for the safety of the nation, he would have himself asked to go to the western front. However, he now realized that was a huge mistake on his end. When he saw that Roman had arrived so quickly, Stephen realized that he had come running here as fast as he could. Quack! Quack! Eventually, even the last soldier in the vicinity died at Roman's hands. After he killed the last enemy nearby, Roman wiped the blood off his sword and walked up to Stephen. Then, he asked, "Are you Stephen?" "Yes. Baron Bruce is dead. From now on, you are in charge of this place, and as you have served on the 5th defense line for many years, tell me what methods are needed to protect this place based on your judgment. If you don't see a chance here with your judgment, then I, Roman Dmitri, will be calling for a retreat as the head of the reserve unit." It was a flustering situation. His mind wasn't ready for this. Still, as Roman asked him about his experience, Stephen thought a bit and then said, "Honestly, this battle is already too much in their favor by now. It would make a lot of sense to retreat now, but doing that will give the enemy a huge advantage instead. A river flowers behind the southern front. They need to clear a way on it to supply troops to move in case the war continues, but they have no chance of winning a long-lasting war unless they completely capture the 5th defense line." He spoke his thoughts. At first, he thought of giving up, but the more he talked, the more he told him why they couldn't leave this place. Then, it was necessary to change the situation. There is only one way. The enemies no longer have to push through the gates. The wall that collapsed left a narrow path, but the gate was different. Even if it's a last-ditch effort, if we can buy ourselves 10 minutes to set up the spare iron fences, We can prevent the enemies from entering. That was the only way. If all the enemies pierced through the fifth defense line, they wouldn't be able to win even if they sacrificed all their troops. Still, even though Stephen knew that it was a difficult choice, he had to do his best. Nevertheless, the plan he came up with was still impossible. When hundreds of enemies were rushing through the gates each passing second, how on earth could they secure it? But just then, Roman said, "I will secure the space that is required for the installation of the iron fences. Now, you must mobilize your forces and prepare the iron fences as soon as you can." Stephen couldn't help but be shocked as soon as he heard those words. Chapter 83. An Unforeseen Disaster. Part 4. The plan Roman had given was literally reckless. It wasn't anything like solving the problem with a clever operation, but breaking through the enemy forces and securing a space to install the iron fence on through sheer force. Stephen decided this just wasn't it. Even he had thought about it, but he hadn't said it because he didn't want to discourage Roman. It is too difficult and dangerous to break through not only the enemy's army, which is currently entering through the gate, but the forces waiting outside to rush in too. Don't you get it that when you are isolated, you will not be able to survive? The strategy of installing the iron fence itself is impossible. It was the first time he had met a man like Roman Dmitri. What was certain was that as soon as he heard the news about the 5th defense line being attacked, he rushed here to arrive even earlier than the other reserve units, and struggled a lot to clear the enemies. That was why, even though the commander himself had run away, Stephen was reassured just with the presence of Roman Dmitri by his side as his ally. And that was also why he wanted Roman to live. Wouldn't it be too unfair if someone like Roman died in a place Baron Bruce should have? I can understand what you're worried about. However, I am not a guy who risks his life on an operation which he considers impossible. Hook. An enemy tried to do a surprise attack from behind. However, Roman, who had already noticed him, dodged it with minimal movements and thrust his sword through his chin. The enemy trembled and soon died. However, that wasn't the end of it. Soon, soldiers arrived from behind and shocked Stephen. "Master, give us your orders." It was because Chris and the other soldiers who had arrived were also drenched in blood, as if they had showered in it. It seemed there was no one wounded among them because the blood on them was that of the enemies they had killed on their way here. Their eyes looked like those of predators. Seeing the true spirit of war on this battlefield and those who were waiting for Roman's orders, Stephen's intuition said that there was still hope left. Then, Roman said, "From now onward, we will make way for the gate to be closed." Yes. No one questioned that risky plan. What were they thinking? Them following Roman's orders without even the slightest doubt showed how loyal and disciplined they were. Stephen admired their blind trust. Baron Bruce, who was also called a leader and followed by Stephen and his men, ran away as soon as the gates were pierced, but Roman soldiers looked like they would follow him to hell itself if he gave the order to do so. How did he even form such a relationship with them? It was not something Stephen could understand with his common sense. Roman took the lead. Seeing that he hadn't come to his senses yet, Roman said, "Focus on your role. The war is not over yet." As soon as he finished those words, Roman ran toward the enemies and initiated another massacre on the battlefield. It seemed as if blood was raining down from the sky. And soon, a path made of blood opened up. The men who were following Roman did the same as well. Ah! Stephen only then got back to his senses. There was no time to be lost in thoughts now. The plan had already begun, and in order for Roman's actions to not be in vain, he had to do his part. "Squad 2, follow me. From now on, we all will move and block the gates with the emergency iron fences." Stephen shouted out loud. From now on, it was their chance to risk their lives and fulfill their roles. Before he left for the southern front, Roman was lost in thought. Do I need to take a risk for this country filled with unpatriotic people? According to the information he had collected, the Hector Kingdom was clearly sending signals of war on the southern front. Even the foreign Valhalla Empire had read those signals and warned Roman, but the Cairo kingdom didn't even know what kind of situation they themselves were in. It was that much of a pathetic nation. In order for the history to not repeat, one needs to have a sober running government, but despite this nation being divided into 4 factions, not one could make the right decision. Roman could not even be called a person of Cairo. As he had lived his life as Bek Jimhyuk, he didn't have to be loyal to Cairo. There are many ways to avoid the war. If I take the hand of Marquis Benedict, I can get exempted from military duty, and there is another way to take the side of Valhalla, which is already quite strong. In the end, war is a battle in which the powerless side has to make sacrifices. Now that my worth has been recognized in Cairo, I have gained the privilege of being a strong person. In the world of unknown things, dangers lurked everywhere. Nevertheless, Roman's troubles didn't last long. I cannot bow my head to avoid the danger in front of me or promise to take another side. In his past life, there were many brothers above him in the beginning. And among those many brothers, some of them were literally quite great. Nevertheless, most of them couldn't escape the eldest son without any compromise. Honestly, most people said that it was fine to compromise once or twice. However, it was still a very important thing that showed one's will. If he didn't kneel in front of anyone, he understood he could stand firm until the end, but the moment he knelt the body even once, Roman knew that he would get used to the comfort of kneeling down. Marquis Benedict, the Valhalla Empire, the Kronos Empire, and even the royal family of Cairo, all 4 factions which divided Cairo wanted Roman, but he didn't give any of them a definite answer. Instead of forming a relationship with them, Roman wanted to solve the problems in his reality with his own effort. In the first place, he knew it was poisonous to bow to someone while he had the purpose of reigning above all inside himself. Also, he wanted to stay as one of Dmitri until the end. I will leave for the southern front. He made his decision. The difficulties because of nobles? A small nation's reality. He didn't care about such conditions. The heavenly demon was born in a difficult situation, yet he rose to the top of the demonic sect and made everyone else kneel before him. Actually, his blood was boiling in ecstasy now. He had missed his life on the battlefield dearly. In the final years of his life, the never-ending peace and quiet didn't arouse much thirst from within him. And with those emotions, Roman rushed toward the enemy's camp. It was already a battle being fought without any hope. Through the completely open gates, the soldiers of Hector were rushing in, and Cairo's soldiers were busy being pushed back. The difference in power was too vast. As it was a situation in which only one of Hector's soldiers was dealing with 2 to 3 of Cairo's soldiers, the area around the castle gates soon changed into one under the control of Hector. Everyone knew that the battle was already over. Nevertheless, unlike the soldiers who were trying to run away as far as they could, Roman was rushing toward the enemy and leaving them behind in the dust. Whack! 5 enemies who rushed in toward him got their throats slashed. And Roman, who had their blood splatter on him, went into the gap created without even flinching. Obviously, it was a dangerous situation. Nevertheless, even when Hector's soldiers attacked from all directions seeing the enemy alone, not a single of their attacks touched Roman. He had literally blocked all of their attacks by himself. On the right side. Whack! Roman sensed the wind blowing from the spear being thrust. He then grabbed the spear and pulled his opponent toward him to cut off his head. And once he did that, he jumped straight ahead and attacked the other enemies in his vicinity. Crack! It was an astonishing sight. Obviously, he had raised his shield to block it, but all the soldiers behind it were killed because of the recoil from defending Roman's attack and bouncing back farther away. The enemy's counterattack didn't even touch a strand of Roman's hair. While he continued to advance, he either blocked, avoided, or attacked the enemies in the vicinity. And when they realized that their flow was slowly dying, all of Hector's soldiers decided to rush in and kill him somehow. When Roman killed 20 soldiers on their side, they acknowledged the opponent was a lot stronger than they thought. However, when 30, 40, and even 50 soldiers were slaughtered without leaving a scratch on Roman, their faces were dyed with terror. Stop that man right now. It was a complete mess. All because of one man. Hector's soldiers couldn't push in anymore. The soldiers who were courageous were now cold corpses, and yet, Roman was mercilessly killing every enemy he saw on the battlefield. It wasn't just aura, no, Roman wasn't even using aura. He was currently showing the power that far surpassed any aura. The heavenly demon, Baek Jung-hyuk, was someone who had learned to kill people without things like that. He was someone who had crushed his opponent's head with a stone and someone who would choose any method to win if needed. While moving from the bottom to the top of the demonic sect, he had experienced many things. And Baek Jung-hyuk, who had gained absolute power due to that, couldn't be stopped by such people. That was why, even though he was surrounded by enemies all around him and isolated from allies, he continued to slaughter his enemies. Just as a huge number of sheep could not subdue a single wolf, Roman continued to unilaterally slaughter his enemies. And that wasn't the end of it. Roman soldiers were also different from normal soldiers. If one soldier of Hector was enough to take down 3 of Cairo's soldiers, then one of Roman's soldiers could take down 5 to 6 of them easily. The situation had thus changed. Although there were only 30 people in the reserve unit and it was quite small, the atmosphere of the entire battlefield had changed because of that small reserve unit. And Hector's commander was continuously watching the entire situation from far away. Baron McCleary was Hector's commander and in charge of the attack on the 5th defense line. He was certain of victory when the gates broke down. TCH, pathetic bastards. It was funny to him. Hector hadn't actually used much of its force yet. Only some of the troops of the entire army were sent to the 5th defense line, and yet, Cairo couldn't withstand such a measly attack. Their stupid response of firing arrows, and the water-based weapons didn't work as well. Despite being a kingdom surrounded by war, it had shown a pathetic response. It is unexpected, but we might break through the 5th defense line before anything else. The original plan didn't have anything to do with winning or losing here. They deduced that once they attacked, the sand castle that was called Cairo would just collapse on its own. Well, all 5 defense lines had to be captured anyway. So, Baron McCleary didn't see anything wrong with the achievement of capturing the 5th one first. Attack. Completely destroy the 5th defense line. He made the decision as this was a huge chance for him. He convinced himself that this defense line could be broken down soon. And it even worked out initially, but it was only until he saw a strange scene. The soldiers who were supposed to head further were somehow running back now. Run away. Get back. Ack. The soldiers of Hector could be seen running away from something. Baron McCleary was stunned when he saw the soldiers running away, scared, even though they were on the battlefield. He still couldn't understand what was happening. If there weren't a lot of Cairo soldiers aiming for them, why were they running away? Just what is happening? The question arose within him. Just then, the soldiers ran away even further and he saw the figure of an enemy fighting the surrounding soldiers that were waiting for him in the space that opened up. And that was an overwhelming sight for him. As soon as he saw them, he unilaterally slaughtered all surrounding Hector's soldiers. Just then, Baron McCleary made eye contact with him. His eyes were so terrifying that he involuntarily began to gasp for air. Also, the moment they had made eye contact, that man suddenly began to run toward Baron McCleary. Even more blood sprayed, and even more heads flew off. Still, he didn't stop running toward him. In the short time Baron McCleary closed his eyes and opened them, that man had almost reached where he was. He wants to kill me? No, it can't be. It was impossible for Baron McCleary to believe something like that with his common sense. Kill him before he gets any closer. Yes. And when the Knights of Hector went forward, Baron McCleary believed he was safe. Chapter 84. An Unforeseen Disaster. Part 5. The distance between the gate and Baron McCleary was quite far. It was common sense not to pass through the front that was filled with enemies, but Roman had different thoughts. The enemy commander is careless. Was it because Cairo was considered weak by him? Baron McCleary had actually stepped ahead out in the open to observe the situation. Of course, it could be said by others that he was still at a safe distance, but he wasn't as far that he wouldn't be untouched by Roman. Thus, Roman changed his plan instantly. Initially, he was only going to secure the space that was around the gate until Stephen and his soldiers installed the emergency iron fence, but he now ran ahead the moment he made eye contact with Baron McCleary. "I will kill the commander. That is the best way to end this battle quickly." He had experienced in numerous battlefields that the moment the commander's head falls down, the enemies fall down as well. "Stop him. The enemy is alone." The soldiers of Hector were furious. When they saw Roman, who dared to come here by himself, they all attacked him at once. However, the scene of him exchanging blows with numerous at once took their breath away. The weapons flying in from all directions were all aiming for his life. However, not a single attack worked on Roman. Tadong! All the weapons bounced back once the attacks were blocked. Still, that wasn't the end. The soldiers who had attempted to attack him also fell down while screaming their lungs out as their limbs were cut off. There were literally hundreds of enemies. Thus, it was common sense for them to have the advantage and for Roman to fall down, but as time passed, only the damage on their own side increased. "Get out of the way! Stop running around!" Once the Knights of Hector received the orders from Baron McCleary, they instantly rushed ahead. Obviously, they weren't just ordinary knights. All of them were aura swordsmen who could manifest different types of auras on their swords. SRRNG. The aura that enveloped the sword seemed to explode. And as they all had attacked at the same time, Hector's soldiers breathed in relief that Roman would finally go down now. Heavenly Demon Sword Art, second move. With a single breath, mana swelled within Roman, and an aura erupted toward the enemies who were running fiercely toward him. And because of a single hit from the Heavenly Demon Sword Art, the Knights of Hector, who were confident of their victory, perished without even knowing what had happened. Kwa kwa kwang. That was how shocking the power was. The auras the knights had manifested scattered around as if they were pieces of paper in a tornado, and their bodies, which had to be as strong as armor made of steel, were shredded into a million pieces. Everyone was blown away. That was the moment they all realized that the existence they were dealing with was a monster they couldn't even touch the toes of. They all understood Roman had come into the enemy camp despite seeing so many enemies because he knew he wouldn't have a problem even if he fought all of them at once. In Roman Dimitri's life, no, in Baek Jung-hyuk's life, battles in which he was outnumbered were common. Even when he was against the masters of Murim, he was at a numerical disadvantage. He understood that Stephen meant not to overdo it. However, now that the enemy commander was in his range, he decided to end the battle at once. Tack! He kicked the ground, and suddenly, he was before Baron McCleary, who was utterly shocked. It was natural. Dozens of soldiers of Hector were just slaughtered in front of him, and even Hector's aura knights, some of the best soldiers on their side, were torn apart with just one move. The plan that Hector had devised was now shattered as well, and Roman Dimitri was so strong that he couldn't calculate how to stop him. His eyes trembled. His head was telling him to run away as fast as he could, but at that moment, he remembered the command he had heard before he came here and announced war to Cairo's soldiers. There is no need to force things forward and capture the 5th defense line. The only thing you must do is buy as much time as possible. We need plenty of time for our plans to succeed. Fuck. Within 1 hour of declaring the war, a huge variable had already appeared that would hinder Hector's goal. Baron McCleary drew his sword. He was a swordsman as well. And as he knew how to use 2-star aura, he planned to do his best. I am Baron McCleary of Hector. I will. Slash. Whack. It was a single slash. Nevertheless, it was so fast that the moment Roman had arrived in front of him, in an instant, the head of Baron McCleary had flown into the air, and blood started to gush down his body like a fountain. His judgment was too arrogant. As Hector's knights themselves couldn't handle Roman Dimitri, he should have just run away. Nevertheless, after the death of the commander, Roman grabbed his head and raised it high into the sky. Then, he shouted with a voice filled with mana, "The enemy commander is dead." At that moment, as if everything that was happening on the battlefield never actually happened, everyone who was on the battlefield stopped acting. The atmosphere was ice cold now. Hector's soldiers didn't understand what they should do. They had enough power to fight despite their commander's death. Still, the situation was too confusing. And it was Roman Dmitri who broke the silence. Slash. Quack. He had done so by slashing the enemy in front of him. It was beyond common sense. Usually, once the enemy commander was killed, the enemy soldiers were forced to surrender. Actually, it might have even been the case if the opponent was the Barco family. Roman had ended the situation back then by killing the head of the Barco family and his son. Nevertheless, it was different this time. Hector had attacked Cairo without any warning. Not only was this a war without a cause, but the other defense lines were still under attack, even while they were here on the 5th defense line. Roman raised his voice and said, "Soldiers of Cairo, listen clearly. We cannot afford to secure war prisoners now. Even now, the other defense lines are under attack by the Hector kingdom. If we let them live, they will definitely come back and initiate another war for revenge. Even if it means we need to shed blood now, risk your lives and execute the enemies." The war with Barco could be said to be a personal fight based on let your opponent cut your flesh in order to break his bone. And since it was a fight within the same kingdom, if the commander was taken care of and the soldiers surrendered, most likely, they wouldn't come back to fight for revenge. However, they were now dealing with the soldiers of Hector. Even if their commander had died, they still belonged to the Hector kingdom and hence would fight until the end. And honestly, surrender wasn't even allowed in wars between nations. Thus, even if their arms were ripped off, it was absolutely necessary to deal with the enemies now that they had gained momentum. Being on the opposite side was enough reason to be cruel in war. And when the soldiers of Cairo saw Roman continuing to slaughter his enemies without showing the slightest mercy, all of the soldiers cheered, "Follow Roman Dmitri. Kill all the remnants of Hector." They blocked the exit. Hector's soldiers were now cornered. Finally, they understood that they couldn't get out of here alive. By the time Henry Albert arrived, the tide of war had already turned. When he heard the report, it was clearly stated that the 5th defense line was on the verge of collapsing, but the scene in front of him was different from that. This is. Outside the fortress, a one-sided massacre was going on. Cairo's soldiers, who were taking advantage of the current situation, attacked the enemy with faces that made them look like they were possessed by devils. How did this happen? He couldn't understand it at all. Nevertheless, he became certain of one thing: Roman Dimitri's presence stands out even in fierce battles. This is how powerful Roman Dmitri is. He truly had an overwhelming presence. Hector's soldiers, who were cornered, tried to rush in without any fear, but the moment they got close to Roman, they died without even being able to swing their swords. Their numerical advantage felt literally meaningless. No matter how much they rushed in, they only died. Henry had seen rankers fight before. Even then, he thought that rankers were people on a whole different level. Nevertheless, those he had seen glorified now seemed like trash in front of Roman Dmitri. When he had heard that Roman was someone who had defeated Homer at the age of 25, he thought he must have some weakness, but now that he saw him fighting with his own eyes, he realized that the rumors didn't even do justice to how strong he truly was. Also, Roman soldiers couldn't be said to be weak as well. In particular, Chris, Kevin, and Pookie showed power that a normal soldier could never have. Now he understood why they were different from the news. It was due to the variable known as Roman Dmitri. I can finally see why Uncle told me to get on the good side of Roman Dmitri. He gulped, knowing his uncle was right. Him being born as a commoner didn't matter. He became certain that Roman Dmitri was a monster who would devour the entire Cairo kingdom one day. Henry shouted at the soldiers behind him, "Help Roman Dmitri right now. Do not let the bastards of Hector run away. And make sure to stay next to Roman. Henry finished giving his orders. Then, he began to follow his soldiers right from the very back. Finally, all things on the 5th defense line were sorted out. Hector's soldiers didn't fight to the end. When the fear of annihilation engulfed them, some of them abandoned their colleagues to run away. Obviously, most of them died while running away. Roman followed most of them to the very end and killed every single one he could see. Still, there was no way for him to kill so many enemies who were running in different directions at the same time. And when the battle ended, Chris ran toward Roman. Chris and 30 others. No fatalities. It was a fierce battle, yet no one had died. Still, that didn't mean everyone was safe. Everyone basically had at least one wound, but Roman could also see those who had blood dripping and red flesh through the armor. Still, no one groaned even a single time when moving. Henderson, in particular, was unfamiliar with large-scale battles, but he kept his mouth shut despite being soaked in sweat. "You all did a good job. Use potions to heal the wounds." Yes. There were no special thanks. Nevertheless, this alone was enough. And Stephen, who was close by, couldn't help but be shocked. He's giving potions to soldiers? Healing potions were produced in magic towers and costed an enormous sum of money even when they were bought in the least quantity. However, Roman had casually told his soldiers to use such expensive things. At first glance, he could see that they were at least intermediate or high-level potions, but the soldiers still poured the entire vials onto their wounds. Chick! Along with a burning smell, the wounds healed quickly. Now Stephen finally seemed to understand why the soldiers followed Roman Dimitri so blindly. He has overwhelming strength, a daring judgment, and he is not a cheapskate to his men. The trust between Roman Dimitri and his soldiers isn't something that was formed just now. Because he has such a character, even if he jumps into the pit of fire, they would follow him down. His admiration was brief. It was because, soon, Roman turned toward him and said, "You must gather the soldiers and prepare for a second attack. And I need to see soldiers who know the terrain of the southern front. You want to leave right now? The war hasn't ended just yet. Even now, while we have found a little peace, the soldiers of Cairo are dying elsewhere." The war had just started, and this was only a single victory. It didn't mean they had won the war. Roman looked at him with fierce eyes. "I have no intention of watching the Hector kingdom trample this land. Until I have killed all the soldiers of the Hector kingdom who have stepped into our land, I will not stop." He was stunned the moment he heard those words. Obviously, Cairo was at a disadvantage right now. Because of the surprise attack from Hector, the Cairo kingdom had already lost the momentum in the war. Nevertheless, for some reason, Stephen felt the man who was standing in front of him could truly make something out of the current situation. Roman shouted to his soldiers, "I will give you 10 minutes. Make sure you are fully prepared to move." Yes. Roman soldiers were ready to follow his orders. Therefore, only 2 hours after the war had started, the 5th defense line was doing well in its defense. And that was the first variable the Hector kingdom hadn't expected. And it was also the starting point for another variable.